The council chamber was massive, built to house representatives from 40 different species across the known galaxy. Crystalline beings sat beside aquatic creatures in specialized tanks. Tall, elegant aliens with 6 limbs shared space with small, furry delegates who barely reached 3 feet in height. At the human delegation table, Commander Kyle Bennett sat quietly, watching the chaos unfold before him. The emergency session had been called 2 hours ago. The massive viewing screen at the front of the chamber displayed a star system under siege. Explosions dotted the darkness of space. Ships burned and died. The peaceful Talvian colonies were being destroyed one by one. Kyle had been stationed at the Galactic Council for only 6 months. Humanity was still new to the greater galaxy. 3 years ago, a Varani exploration ship had stumbled across Earth's solar system. The discovery had shocked the galactic community. Earth was what they called a deathworld, a planet so hostile that most species would die within hours of landing. High gravity, dangerous predators, extreme weather, and a toxic atmosphere that literally corroded metal. Yet somehow humans had not just survived but thrived. The Varani delegate, Counselor Zerathi, stood at her podium. Her silver skin seemed to shimmer under the chamber lights. Her voice carried sadness as she spoke. The Talvian government has sent a formal distress call. The Cravathi swarm has entered their home system with overwhelming force. Initial reports suggest over 4,000 combat vessels. The Talvian defense fleet has been destroyed. Their colonies are being systematically eliminated. Civilian casualties are estimated in the millions. A ripple of fear passed through the chamber. Kyle noticed how many delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some whispered to their aides. Others stared at the screen with expressions of horror. The Zorkai representative, a being made entirely of living crystal, spoke next. His voice sounded like wind chimes. The Cravathi have never been successfully opposed. They conquer through numbers and they show no mercy. Every species they encounter either submits or is destroyed. We must face reality. We cannot help the Talvians. Kyle felt his jaw tighten. He had read the reports about the Cravathi swarm. They were an empire built on conquest. They had subjugated dozens of species. Their military doctrine was simple: overwhelm the enemy with impossible numbers and brutal efficiency. No negotiations, no mercy. A Delphian delegate raised a webbed hand. The aquatic being's translator device crackled as it spoke. Perhaps we can offer the Talvians refuge. We can evacuate as many as possible before the Cravathi complete their invasion. But we cannot fight. Our vessels are not designed for combat. More voices joined in. Each species offered excuses. The Varani didn't have enough warships. The Zorkai were too fragile for extended combat. The Fuzzy Marani were too small to crew military vessels effectively. On and on it went. Kyle listened to species after species explain why they couldn't help. Finally, Kyle stood up. The chamber fell silent. Many delegates had never heard a human speak at council before. They watched him with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Humans were still an unknown quantity. Stories about the Deathworld species had spread quickly. Tales of incredible strength, frightening endurance, and a disturbing tendency toward violence. Why won't anyone help them? Kyle asked. His voice was calm but firm. Counselor Zerathi looked at him with her large, gentle eyes. Commander Bennett, you must understand. Most species in this galaxy evolved as prey animals. We developed intelligence, cooperation, and technology as alternatives to physical confrontation. The Cravathi are different. They evolved as predators. Their entire society is built around conquest and domination. We simply don't have the instincts for large-scale warfare. Kyle looked around the chamber. He saw the fear in their faces. These were good people. Peaceful civilizations that had built a society based on trade, cooperation, and mutual respect. But they had no idea how to fight back against an enemy like the Cravathi. Then it's fortunate you found a species that does, Kyle said quietly. He tapped his communication device. Commander Bennett to Earth Defense Force Command. Priority Alpha. We need immediate military deployment to Talvian space. The Council has a member species under attack. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Several delegates stood up, talking urgently with their aides. Zerathi looked at Kyle with concern. Commander, what are you doing? Answering a distress call, Kyle replied. Isn't that what allies do? Across the galaxy, on Earth, Admiral Lisa Hayes received Kyle's message in her office at Earth Defense Force headquarters. She was a veteran of the Unification Wars, the conflicts that had finally brought all of humanity under one government. She had silver hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much combat. When the message finished playing, she sat back in her chair and thought carefully. 4,000 Kravathi ships. That was more than the entire Earth Defense Force had in active service. The smart play would be to refuse. Tell the Council that humanity was too new, too small, too unprepared for this kind of fight. Let someone else handle it. But Lisa had not become an admiral by taking the smart play. She tapped her desk console. Get me Captain Morrison. Tell him to prep the Retribution battle group for immediate deployment. Full combat load. I want him ready to jump in 6 hours. Captain Jake Morrison received the orders while inspecting his ship. The Retribution was an Earth Defense Force heavy cruiser, one of the newest vessels in the fleet. She was a brutal-looking ship, all sharp angles and heavy armor. Human ship design favored protection and firepower over the elegant curves that most alien vessels used. Jake was 42 years old, with graying hair at his temples and a scar across his left cheek from a training accident years ago. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years, working his way up from a junior navigation officer to ship captain. He was known for being calm under pressure and having an aggressive tactical mind. His executive officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, found him on the observation deck. Amy was 31, brilliant, and had a reputation for being even more aggressive than Jake. She had scored the highest marks in tactical school in 15 years. Her specialty was asymmetric warfare, finding ways to win fights that looked impossible on paper. Captain, we just received deployment orders, Amy said, handing him a data pad. Talvian system, emergency response to Kravathi invasion. Jake read the orders carefully. His eyes narrowed as he saw the estimated enemy strength. 4,000 ships. They're sending us 30. Seems about right, Amy said with a slight smile. Wouldn't want it to be too easy. Jake looked at her. You understand this is probably a one-way trip. Amy's smile faded, but her eyes remained steady. I understand we have a job to do, sir. Some people need help. That's what we signed up for. Jake nodded slowly. Get the battle group commanders on secure channel. I want to brief them before we jump. Over the next 6 hours, the Retribution battle group prepared for departure. 30 warships, from heavy cruisers to fast destroyers. Magazines were loaded with missiles and railgun ammunition. Fighter squadrons ran final checks on their craft. Engineers verified jump drives and reactor systems. Medical bays prepared for casualties. Lieutenant Danny Foster sat in his fighter cockpit, running pre-flight diagnostics. He was 26, one of the youngest fighter pilots in the fleet. He had joined the Defense Force because his grandfather had flown atmospheric fighters during the Unification Wars. Danny had grown up on stories of aerial combat and had always wanted to fly. His fighter was a lean, predatory machine. Human fighters were built for high-speed combat and extreme maneuvers. They could pull accelerations that would kill most other species. The cockpit was cramped, filled with displays and controls. Danny loved it. His wing leader's voice came over the radio. All Falcon Squadron pilots, this is Falcon Lead. Final briefing in the ready room in 30 minutes. Be there, Danny acknowledged and continued his checks. He had read the intelligence reports on the Kravathi. They used swarm tactics, overwhelming enemies with numbers. Their individual ships weren't particularly advanced, but they made up for it with sheer quantity. It was going to be a target-rich environment. In the Retribution's engineering section, Megan Torres supervised the installation of several experimental weapons. She was the lead engineer, responsible for keeping the ship's systems running at peak efficiency. Megan was 35, with oil-stained hands and a mind that understood machines better than people. The experimental weapons were her idea. Standard Earth Defense Force doctrine used railguns and missiles, but Megan had been studying the intelligence reports on Kravathi ship design. Their hulls were relatively thin. They relied on numbers rather than heavy armor, so she had convinced Admiral Hayes to let her install some old-fashioned weapons on the battle group, nuclear-tipped torpedoes. Most galactic species considered them barbaric and primitive. They preferred clean energy weapons that could disable ships without destroying them completely. But humans had never stopped developing their nuclear arsenal. Megan had modified the torpedoes to burn hotter and faster. Each one carried the explosive power of a small star. Jake Morrison's voice came over the ship-wide intercom. All hands, this is the captain. In 10 minutes, we jump to the Talvian system. We're going. The 200 Cravathi ships moved through space in a tight formation. Their hulls were black as midnight, covered in angular plates that absorbed sensor scans. Each vessel bristled with weapons, designed for overwhelming firepower rather than elegant efficiency. The Cravathi had conquered their way across 40 systems using these tactics. They saw no reason to change now. On the command ship, War Master Thex studied the approaching human vessels with contempt. He was a Cravathi commander, which meant he had survived countless battles and proved his worth through blood. His species were insectoid with hard shells and multiple limbs. They communicated through a combination of clicks and chemical signals that their translator devices converted to galactic standard language. 30 vessels. Thex clicked to his subordinates. These humans must be fools or desperate, perhaps both. 200 of our ships should be sufficient to crush them. Once we eliminate this minor annoyance, we will continue with the Talvayan extermination. The Cravathi ships accelerated to attack speed. By their calculations, they would be in weapons range in 6 minutes. They expected the humans to either flee or die. Those were the only two outcomes the swarm ever saw. On the Retribution, Amy Chen watched the enemy approach with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. She had spent years studying military history. Not just human conflicts, but every battle the Earth Defense Force Intelligence Service could gather information about. She knew the Cravathi doctrine inside and out. Swarm tactics. Overwhelming numbers. Predictable attack patterns, Captain, Amy said, her fingers flying across her tactical console. The enemy is maintaining a tight formation. Standard Cravathi assault pattern. They're grouping their ships to maximize combined firepower. Jake Morrison nodded. Which also means if we can break their formation, they'll have trouble coordinating. Recommendations? Aggressive engagement. We use our speed and maneuverability to get inside their formation before they can establish firing solutions. Once we're in close, their numbers become a liability. They'll be as likely to hit each other as to hit us. Jake looked at the display. It was a risky plan. No, it was an insane plan. But safe plans didn't win battles against enemies that outnumbered you 100 to 1. All ships, execute attack pattern Morrison Alpha. Maximum acceleration. We're going right down their throats. The human battle group suddenly accelerated forward at speeds that made the Cravathi sensors flicker in confusion. The Retribution's drives blazed with nuclear fire as the ship pushed toward combat velocity. Around her, the other 29 vessels matched her acceleration. Inside the Retribution, crew members felt the pressure of acceleration push them back into their seats. The inertial dampeners could only do so much. Even with the technology that reduced the effect of G-forces, the crew still felt the strain. But humans had trained for this. Their bodies were adapted for it. On their death world, they had evolved to handle stress that would kill most galactic species. Danny Foster felt the acceleration press him into his fighter's cockpit seat and grinned. This was what he lived for. His squadron had launched 2 minutes ago and was now racing ahead of the main fleet. Fighter pilots always went in first. That was the job. Falcon Squadron, this is Falcon Lead. His squadron commander's voice came over the radio. We're going to hit their forward screen first. Pairs formation. Target their sensor arrays and weapons clusters. Make them blind and toothless. Execute on my mark. Danny checked his weapon status. His fighter carried a mix of missiles and a wee rotary cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds at hypersonic speeds. Simple, brutal, effective. The missiles were smart enough to track targets, but the cannon required skill. Danny preferred the cannon. The Cravathi formation suddenly opened fire. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space between the two fleets. The range was still long, but the Cravathi were hoping to score lucky hits. Their doctrine said to fill space with fire and let probability do the work. But the human ships were moving too fast. They jinked and rolled, making themselves harder to hit. Shots that should have connected missed by meters. The few hits that did land splashed against reinforced armor and shield generators that the Varani had helped humans improve. Range in 30 seconds, Amy announced. All weapons hot. Target locks acquired. Jake gripped his command chair's armrest. All ships free to engage. Show them what Earth's children can do. 29 ships opened fire at once. The effect was devastating. Human railguns fired solid slugs of tungsten, and depleted uranium accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. Each projectile carried kinetic energy measured in megatons. When they hit Cravathi hulls, the result was catastrophic. Ships simply came apart, torn into fragments by impacts that delivered more force than most species' main weapons. The nuclear-tipped torpedoes that Megan Torres had installed followed seconds later. They didn't just explode. They detonated with the fury of miniature stars. The first one caught 3 Cravathi ships in its blast radius. The ships' hulls melted. Atmosphere vented into space. Internal systems overloaded from the electromagnetic pulse. The vessels went dark and dead, tumbling away as wreckage. War Master Thex stared at his displays in shock. In the first 10 seconds of combat, the humans had destroyed 15 of his ships. 15. The swarm had never experienced losses like this. His tactical officers were clicking in panic, trying to adjust their targeting solutions. Focus fire on their lead vessels, Thex commanded. Concentrate all weapons on the largest ship. We will overwhelm their defenses through sheer volume. Hundreds of weapons turned toward the Retribution. Energy beams and plasma bolts converged on Jake's ship. For a moment, it looked like the vessel would be vaporized. But the Retribution's shields held, glowing bright blue as they absorbed the incoming fire. And then the ship rolled, presenting a different shield face to the enemy, letting the first set of shields cool and regenerate. Amy Chen's console showed shield strength dropping, then rising again. Shields holding at 70%. Varani shield generators are performing better than expected. We can take this punishment for a while. We won't need to, Jake said. He watched his tactical display as the human fleet executed the next phase of their attack plan. All ships, into their formation, execute. The human ships suddenly dove into the Cravathi formation like wolves into a flock of sheep. At these close ranges, the Cravathi's number advantage became a problem. Their ships had to be careful not to hit each other. Human vessels had no such concern. They knew exactly where every friendly ship was and fired with precision. Danny Foster's fighter squadron hit the Cravathi formation like a swarm of angry hornets. The fighters were tiny compared to the capital ships, but they were fast and deadly. Danny picked his target, a Cravathi destroyer that was trying to line up a shot on one of the human cruisers. He rolled his fighter, accelerating at 12 Gs, a force that would have killed most alien pilots. His targeting system locked on. Danny squeezed the trigger. The rotary cannon spun up and unleashed a stream of depleted uranium rounds. The projectiles tore through the Cravathi ship's hull like paper. Internal explosions rippled along the destroyer's length. The ship broke in half, venting atmosphere and debris. Splash 1, Danny called over the radio, already hunting his next target. Across the battle space, the other human fighters were doing the same. They moved in pairs, covering each other, striking weak points in the Cravathi ships. The enemy tried to target the small, fast craft but couldn't get solid locks. Human pilots had trained in brutal conditions, learning to make their craft dance through weapons fire that should have been impossible to dodge. Megan Torres monitored the battle from the Retribution's engineering section. She watched power consumption, shield strength, and weapon status on her displays. Everything was working perfectly. The experimental weapons were exceeding performance expectations. The Cravathi ships were poorly designed for modern warfare. They relied on numbers, not quality. Engineering to bridge, Megan said into her communicator. Captain, I'm seeing stress fractures forming in their hull patterns. Their ships are built light to maximize numbers. If we concentrate fire on their structural weak points, we can take them down even faster. Transmitting weak point data to all vessels now, Amy said, already working on the tactical solution. Moments later, every human ship received updated targeting information. The railguns shifted their aim points slightly, targeting spots where Cravathi hulls were weakest. The result was immediate. Ships that might have taken multiple hits to destroy now came apart from single shots. The human battle group was cutting through the Cravathi formation like a hot knife through butter. War Master Thex watched his fleet dissolve around him. In 15 minutes of combat, he had lost over 100 ships. 100, and the humans had lost none. 0. One of their destroyers had taken heavy damage and was retreating, but even that ship was still operational. All ships fall back, Thex ordered. Reform at Rally Point Delta. We need to regroup and reassess. But the humans didn't let them retreat cleanly. The battle group pursued, continuing to fire. More Cravathi ships died as they tried to break contact. Danny Foster's squadron harried the fleeing vessels, picking off stragglers. The human fleet positioned itself in orbit around Talvian Prime. The planet was beautiful from space, with blue oceans and green continents visible through wispy white clouds. Cities dotted the surface, though many now showed the dark scars of orbital bombardment. The Talvian people had built a peaceful civilization over thousands of years. Now they watched from shelters as their world became a battlefield. Jake Morrison stood on the Retribution's bridge, studying the tactical display. The Cravathi fleet was coming in fast, 4,000 ships strong. They filled his sensors like a swarm of locusts. But Jake had fought in the Unification Wars. He had learned that numbers only mattered if you could bring them to bear effectively. The key was to control the battlefield, to force the enemy to fight on your terms. Amy, what's the status on the orbital defense platform? Jake asked. Amy Chen checked her displays. The Sentinel is online and ready. Colonel Mitchell reports all weapons are hot and targeting solutions are locked. He says, and I quote, "The Cravathi are about to learn why you don't mess with human engineers." Jake smiled slightly. Colonel Ryan Mitchell commanded the Sentinel, a defense station that the humans had been building in orbit for the past 2 weeks. To the Cravathi, it looked like a simple monitoring station. They had dismissed it as irrelevant. That was going to be a fatal mistake. The Sentinel wasn't a monitoring station. It was a weapons platform built around a mass driver that stretched nearly 2 miles long. The mass driver was essentially a gigantic railgun that used magnetic acceleration to launch projectiles at orbital velocities. Each projectile was the size of a small car and would hit with the force of multiple nuclear weapons. Ryan Mitchell had 600 rounds loaded and ready. All ships, final weapons check, Jake ordered. Fighter squadrons, prepare for launch. This is going to get messy. Stay sharp, watch your wingmen, and remember your training. Bridge out. Throughout the fleet, crews made last-minute preparations. Danny Foster sat in his fighter cockpit, going through his pre-flight checklist for the 3rd time. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. 4,000 enemy ships. This was going to be the biggest fight of his life. Maybe the biggest fight anyone had ever been in. His squadron leader's voice came over the radio. "All right, Falcons. Here's how this works. We're going to be operating in a target-rich environment. That's military speak for there's more bad guys than we can count. Stick with your wingmen. Don't go chasing glory. Work as a team and we'll all go home. Understood?" A chorus of acknowledgments came back. Danny added his own. He checked his weapons one more time. Missiles loaded. Cannon armed. Reactor at full power. He was as ready as he would ever be. On Earth, Admiral Lisa Hayes sat in the command center, watching the battle unfold through real-time data feeds. The information was several minutes old because of the distance, but it was enough to show her what was happening. She had sent 30 ships against an enemy fleet of 4,000. On paper, it was suicide. In reality, she knew her people had a chance. Humans didn't fight fair. They fought to win. Nicole Parker stood beside the Admiral. She was a xenopsychologist, someone who studied alien psychology and behavior. For the past week, Nicole had been analyzing everything the Earth Defense Force knew about the Cravathi. She had found weaknesses in their tactics. The swarm was predictable because they relied on instinct rather than strategy. They always attacked the same way. "They never adapted, Admiral," Nicole said, watching the displays. "The Cravathi are going to commit everything to a frontal assault. They can't help themselves. It's in their nature. Captain Morrison is using that against them." Lisa nodded. "Let's hope he's as good as his reputation suggests." In orbit around Talvian Prime, the Cravathi fleet entered weapons range. War Master Thex had reorganized his forces into a massive wedge formation designed to punch through enemy defenses. 4,000 ships moved as one, their weapons charging for the initial bombardment. Thex was certain of victory. No fleet in galactic history had stood against such numbers. The humans would be vaporized. "All ships open fire," Thex ordered. "Target the human vessels. Destroy them." 4,000 ships fired at once. Space became a storm of energy beams, plasma bolts, and missiles. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. It should have been enough to destroy the human fleet 10 times over. but the humans had positioned themselves carefully. The planet's gravity well affected the trajectories of incoming fire. Many shots missed entirely, pulled off course by gravitational forces. The few that did find targets splashed against overlapping shield generators. The human ships had formed a defensive network, where their shields reinforced each other. One ship's shields weakened, another's covered the gap. Shields holding at 60%, Amy reported. The Varani shield generators are working perfectly. We can sustain this rate of fire for approximately 15 minutes before we need to rotate positions. We won't need 15 minutes, Jake said. Ryan, you're clear to engage. On the Sentinel platform, Ryan Mitchell grinned. He had been waiting for this moment. The mass driver had been charging for hours, building up the energy needed for maximum acceleration. Now it was time to see if the theory worked in practice. Fire Mission Alpha, Ryan ordered. Continuous barrage. Let's knock on their door. The mass driver fired. The station shuddered as magnetic coils unleashed their stored energy. A projectile the size of a car accelerated down the 2-mile barrel, reaching velocities that made it essentially unstoppable. It screamed through space faster than most sensors could track. The projectile hit a Kravathi capital ship. The impact released the energy equivalent of dozens of nuclear weapons. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the kinetic energy of the impact. The explosion was so violent that nearby ships were damaged by the shockwave. Ryan didn't wait to admire his work. The mass driver fired again. And again. Every 15 seconds, another projectile launched. Each one destroyed a capital ship or severely damaged everything in a radius around the impact point. The Kravathi had never encountered this kind of weapon. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons. Kinetic projectiles at these velocities punched right through. War Master Thex watched in horror as his fleet began taking catastrophic losses. In the first 2 minutes, the orbital platform had destroyed 40 ships. 40! And it showed no signs of stopping. He needed to destroy that platform immediately. All ships target the orbital station, Thex ordered. Concentrate all fire. Destroy it now. Hundreds of Kravathi ships shifted their fire toward the Sentinel. Ryan Mitchell saw the incoming fire on his displays and laughed. That's right, come after me. I can take it. The Sentinel's shields flared bright as they absorbed the incoming fire. The platform had been built with human paranoia in mind. It was designed to survive sustained bombardment from multiple enemy fleets. Its shields were military-grade, backed by massive reactors. And while the Kravathi were shooting at the platform, they weren't shooting at the fleet. Jake Morrison saw his opening. All ships execute attack pattern Delta. Hit their flanks while they're distracted. Amy, release the fighters. Tell them to target the command ships. The human fleet suddenly moved, accelerating out of their defensive positions. They didn't charge straight at the enemy. Instead, they split into wolf packs, small groups of 3 or 4 ships that attacked from multiple angles. The Kravathi formation tried to adjust, but they were too slow. The humans were inside their decision loop, acting faster than the enemy could react. Danny Foster's squadron launched from the carrier bays and immediately dove into the chaos. His targeting computer showed hundreds of enemy ships. So many targets that the system couldn't prioritize them all. Danny switched to manual targeting and picked his own victims. Falcon lead, this is Falcon 3. Danny called over the radio. I've got eyes on a Kravathi command ship. Designating target Alpha. Confirmed, Falcon 3, you and Falcon 4 take it. The rest of the squadron will cover you. Danny and his wingman accelerated toward the command ship. It was larger than most Kravathi vessels with more armor and better shields. But it was also broadcasting command signals to the ships around it. Take out the command ship, and you created chaos in a section of the enemy fleet. The 2 fighters dove through a storm of defensive fire. Plasma bolts and energy beams filled the space around them. Danny rolled his fighter, pulling 9Gs, feeling the pressure try to force blood from his brain. His vision narrowed, edged in gray. But his training kicked in. He tensed his leg muscles, forcing blood back to his head. His vision cleared. His wingman fired first, launching missiles at the command ship. The missiles streaked in, forcing the Kravathi shields to focus on defense. That was Danny's opening. He angled in from a different vector and opened fire with his cannon. Depleted uranium rounds tore through the weakened shields and punched into the command ship's hull. Explosions rippled across the vessel. The ship's power grid failed. It went dark and tumbled out of formation. Immediately, the ships around the destroyed command vessel began moving erratically. Without coordination from their leader, they fell back on basic programming. The tight formation dissolved into chaos. "Good kill, Falcon 3, the squadron leader called. "Next target?" News of the battle at Talvian Prime spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every species in the Galactic Council received the recordings. They watched the footage again and again, unable to believe what they were seeing. 30 ships had defeated 4,000. The mighty Cravathi swarm, undefeated conquerors who had terrorized the galaxy for generations, had been forced to retreat by a species that had joined the galactic community less than 3 years ago. In the Cravathi Empire, Supreme Empress Zarthel watched the battle recordings in her throne chamber. She was ancient by Cravathi standards. Having ruled for over 60 years, she had overseen the conquest of dozens of systems. Never in her reign had the swarm been defeated. Now watching War Master Thex's fleet flee from human vessels, she felt something dangerous stirring within her. Rage. "This cannot stand," Zarthel clicked to her advisors. "The swarm does not retreat. We do not show weakness. These humans must be destroyed. They must be made an example so that no other species dares to resist us." Her military commanders gathered around the tactical displays. They showed the full extent of the Cravathi Empire. 40 conquered systems, dozens of subjugated species, thousands of ships spread across their territory. They had the numbers to crush humanity. The question was how to deploy them. "Supreme Empress," one commander clicked carefully. "The humans have proven themselves dangerous opponents. They fight unlike any species we have encountered. Perhaps we should study them further before committing to another engagement." Zarthel's mandibles clicked in anger. "Are you suggesting we show fear? That we allow these Deathworlders to humiliate the swarm without consequence? No, we will gather our full might, 20,000 ships. We will travel to this Earth and burn their homeworld to ash. The galaxy will learn that none defy the Cravathi and survive." Orders went out across the Empire. Ships were recalled from garrison duties. New vessels were pulled from construction yards. The Cravathi began assembling the largest invasion force in their history. It would take months to gather everything, but once ready they would crush humanity and restore the swarm's reputation. On Earth, Commander Kyle Bennett stood before the Galactic Council and made his report. The chamber was packed with delegates from every member species. They listened in silence as Kyle described the battle. When he finished, the chamber erupted in excited conversation. Species that had lived in fear for generations suddenly saw hope. Counselor Zarathi of the Varani stood at her podium. Her voice carried across the chamber. "The humans have proven what we all believed impossible. The Cravathi can be defeated, but we cannot expect humanity to fight all our battles. We must stand with them. We must form a true alliance." The Zorkai delegate rose, his crystalline form reflecting light. "The Varani are correct. For too long we have accepted Cravathi dominance because we believed we had no choice. Now we know better. The Zorkai offer our industrial capacity and our advanced shield technology to support the war effort." More delegates stood. The Delphians offered their superior sensor technology. The Marani contributed their expertise in drone warfare. Species after species pledged support. What had started as one human battle group answering a distress call was becoming something much larger. The Galactic Council was transforming into a military alliance. Kyle coordinated the effort with tireless dedication. He spent 18 hours a day in meetings, negotiating agreements, planning logistics, and building the framework for what they were calling the Alliance. It wasn't easy. Most species had no military tradition. They needed to be taught how to fight, how to organize their forces, how to think strategically. But they were willing to learn, and humans were excellent teachers. Admiral Lisa Hayes oversaw the military integration from Earth. Human officers were assigned to work with alien counterparts. They shared tactical knowledge, combat experience, and weapons technology. In return, the aliens contributed their own innovations. Varani shield generators made human ships tougher. Zorkai sensors could detect enemy vessels at incredible ranges. Delphian navigation computers could plot faster than light jumps with precision that human systems couldn't match. Vice Admiral Kevin Drake took command of the Alliance Armada, a combined fleet of 200 ships from a dozen species. Kevin was 55 years old, a veteran who had served in naval operations for over 3 decades. He had gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for aggressive tactics combined with careful planning. He understood that this fleet was more than just ships. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could accomplish when they worked together. "We're not going to wait for the Cravathi to come to us," Kevin told his assembled ship commanders. They sat in a virtual conference, captains from multiple species appearing as holograms. "We're going to take the fight to them. Hit their supply lines, destroy their shipyards, liberate their conquered territories. We're going to show the galaxy that the age of Cravathi dominance is over." Dr. Laura Chen presented her research to the military command. She was a xenobiologist who had spent the past month studying what made humanity effective in combat. Her findings were revealing. Humans had evolved as endurance predators on a planet that constantly tried to kill them. They developed traits that most species lacked: incredible stamina, high pain tolerance, the ability to track prey over days or weeks. Most importantly, the psychological capacity to keep fighting when logic said you should give up. "Other species see impossible odds and surrender," Laura explained. "Humans see impossible odds and start problem solving. It's why we dominated Earth despite being weaker than many predators. We didn't give up. We found ways to win. That same psychology makes us dangerous in warfare." The Alliance used this knowledge to develop new tactics. They didn't try to make alien species fight like humans. Instead, they helped each species use their unique strengths. Zorkai crystalline pilots discovered they could process tactical information faster than any computer. Their reaction times in combat became legendary. Virani pilots, with their six-limbed anatomy, excelled at controlling multiple weapon systems simultaneously. Delphian pilots had spatial awareness that made them excellent navigators during complex maneuvers. Captain Brandon Lee continued to command the Stealth Operations Division. His Shadow Walker and 3 other stealth ships became the Alliance's secret weapon. They infiltrated Cravathi territory, gathering intelligence and conducting special operations that larger fleets couldn't accomplish. Brandon's ships deployed hunter-killer drones that targeted Cravathi infrastructure. Communication relays went dark. Supply depots exploded. Shipyards suffered mysterious accidents. The Cravathi military command struggled to respond. They were used to direct confrontation, overwhelming enemies with superior numbers, but the Alliance wasn't fighting that kind of war. They struck where the Cravathi were weak, avoided direct fleet engagements when possible, and melted away before reinforcements could arrive. It was asymmetric warfare at its finest, and the Swarm had no doctrine for countering it. Danny Foster found himself in an unexpected role. After the battle at Talvian Prime, he became something of a celebrity among Alliance pilots. Other species wanted to learn from the human fighter ace. Danny discovered he had a talent for teaching. He ran training programs, showing alien pilots human combat techniques while learning from them in return. "The key is to think three-dimensionally," Danny explained to a class of mixed species pilots. "Space combat isn't like atmospheric flight. There's no up or down. You can attack from any angle. Use that, be unpredictable, and most importantly, trust your wingman. You watch their back, they watch yours. That's how you survive." The Alliance began launching coordinated strikes against Cravathi holdings. They didn't attack the core systems. Those were too heavily defended. Instead, they targeted the edges of the Empire. Supply convoys were ambushed. Garrison forces found themselves under attack from enemies they couldn't catch. Conquered species began to rebel, emboldened by news of Cravathi defeats. On a Cravathi-occupied world called Dravix, the local population rose in revolt. They were the Dravixian people, conquered 20 years earlier and forced to provide resources to the Swarm. When Alliance ships appeared in orbit and offered support, the Dravixians seized weapons and attacked their occupiers. The Cravathi garrison found itself fighting both the Alliance fleet and a planet-wide rebellion. Within 3 days, Dravix was liberated. Similar uprisings occurred across Cravathi territory. Each liberation brought new ships and resources to the Alliance. The freed species didn't just accept help. They joined the fight. Former Cravathi prisoners became Alliance soldiers. Conquered worlds became Alliance bases. The movement grew with each victory. Lieutenant Christina Moore worked in Alliance intelligence, analyzing Cravathi communications and battle patterns. She discovered something interesting. The Cravathi weren't adapting. They kept using the same tactics, the same formations, the same strategies. When those failed, they just used more ships instead of trying something different. "They're predictable," Christina reported to Admiral Hayes. "They have no flexibility in their doctrine. They can't improvise. If we can predict where they'll strike next, we can be waiting for them." The Cravathi Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. 8,000 ships, their black hulls absorbing light, making them look like holes torn in space itself. Supreme Empress Zarthel stood in her command ship's bridge, her mandibles clicking with satisfaction. She had lost her empire, but she would have her revenge. Earth would burn. The Deathworlders would die. The galaxy would remember the price of defying the swarm. On Earth, alarm sirens wailed across every city. People had known this day might come. They had spent months preparing. Evacuation shelters had been dug deep underground, designed to survive nuclear war. Orbital defense platforms ringed the planet like a crown of thorns. The asteroid belt had been converted into a weapons grid. Mars hosted massive railgun batteries. The Moon held missile silos that could launch hundreds of warheads. Humanity had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. General Alex Warren stood in the Planetary Defense Command Center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was 60 years old with more gray hair than brown, and he had served in the military for 40 years. He had fought in the Unification Wars. He had seen the worst that humans could do to each other. Now he would see if humanity could defend against an alien invasion. "Status report," Alex ordered, his voice calm despite the situation. Reports flowed in from across the solar system. The orbital defense grid was online. Every platform had weapons hot and shields at maximum. The human fleet had taken position in high orbit. 300 ships, the largest force Earth had ever assembled. But they weren't alone. The Alliance had come. Vice Admiral Kevin Drake commanded the Alliance Armada from his flagship. 500 ships from a dozen species surrounded Earth. Varani cruisers with their advanced shields, Sorkai vessels that glittered like diamonds, Delphian ships designed for hit-and-run attacks, Talvian defenders who had come to repay the debt they owed humanity, even some reformed Cravathi ships crewed by defectors who had chosen freedom over the swarm. "All ships, this is Admiral Drake," Kevin transmitted across the fleet. "Today we defend Earth. Not because we have to, but because we choose to. The Cravathi think they can destroy this world and break our alliance. They're wrong. We stand together. We fight together. And together we will win. All ships to battle stations." Captain Tyler Ross commanded Fortress Prime, the largest orbital defense station. His platform bristled with weapons, shield generators, and sensor arrays. Tyler was 45, a career officer who had spent the last 20 years in space. He knew every inch of his station, every weapon system, every structural weakness. Fortress Prime was his ship, and he would defend her with everything he had. "Weapons check complete," Tyler's tactical officer reported. "All systems nominal. Mass drivers charged and ready. Missile batteries loaded. Defense lasers online." "Sir, we're as ready as we'll ever be." Tyler nodded, watching his displays. The Cravathi fleet was moving into attack formation. 8,000 ships organizing for an overwhelming assault. "Steady, people. Let them come to us. We've prepared for this. Stay focused, follow your training, and we'll send these bugs running." Samantha Brooks worked in the Civilian Evacuation Center beneath New York City. She was a logistics coordinator, responsible for making sure the millions of civilians in the shelter system had food, water, medical care, and hope. Samantha was 38, a former city planner who had volunteered for this duty when the war started. The shelter around her held 50,000 people. Children played in designated areas, trying to stay calm despite the fear. Adults watched news feeds showing the Cravathi fleet approaching. Medical staff prepared for potential casualties. Everyone was scared, but they stayed organized. Humans were good at that. Staying organized when everything seemed hopeless. Ms. Brooks, a young volunteer, called. "We're getting requests from civilians who want to help with the defense. Engineers, programmers, even just people who want to do something useful. What should we tell them?" Samantha thought for a moment. "Set up workstations. Anyone with technical skills can monitor systems, help with calculations, coordinate supply lines. Even during a siege, we need people doing the everyday work. Give them purpose. It will help with morale." The Cravathi fleet reached weapons range and opened fire. 8,000 ships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space like a storm of deadly light. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. It was designed to saturate defenses, to punch through shields by simple, overwhelming force. But Earth was ready. The orbital defense platforms activated their shield network. Hundreds of generators created overlapping fields of energy that covered the planet like a glowing blue shell. Cravathi fire splashed against the shields, dissipating into harmless radiation. Some shots penetrated, but the inner defense layers caught them. Defense lasers tracked incoming projectiles and vaporized them before they could reach the atmosphere. Alex Warren watched the defensive grid hold and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They can't break through with brute force. They're going to have to commit to a close assault. When they do, hit them with everything. The Cravathi fleet moved closer, trying to penetrate the defensive screen. That was when the human fleet struck. 300 warships surged forward, not to meet the enemy head-on but to hit their flanks. Human wolfpack tactics on a massive scale. The ships worked in coordinated groups, focusing fire on weak points, destroying enemy vessels before moving to the next target. Danny Foster led his fighter squadron into the chaos. This was the biggest battle he had ever fought. The space around Earth was filled with thousands of ships. Weapons fire lit up the darkness like fireworks. His targeting computer couldn't keep up with all the contacts. Danny switched to manual targeting and trusted his instincts. Falcon Squadron, target those cruisers attacking Fortress Prime. His wing commander ordered. We need to take pressure off the station. Danny acknowledged and dove toward the Cravathi vessels. His fighter twisted through a maze of weapons fire, pulling G-forces that would have killed most aliens. He locked onto a Cravathi cruiser and fired his missiles. They streaked forward, slamming into the enemy ship's shields. The shields flickered. Danny followed up with his cannon, stitching depleted uranium rounds across the cruiser's hull. Explosions rippled along the ship's length. It veered out of formation, trailing atmosphere. The Alliance ships joined the battle with devastating effect. Varani cruisers tanked huge amounts of fire, their shields absorbing punishment that would destroy normal vessels. Zorkai ships moved with impossible precision, their pilots processing tactical data faster than computers. Delphian vessels appeared, launched missiles and vanished before the Cravathi could respond. The reformed Cravathi ships fought with special fury, attacking their former comrades with insider knowledge of swarm tactics. Captain Tyler Ross directed Fortress Prime's weapons with brutal efficiency. His mass drivers fired continuously, each shot destroying a capital ship. His missile batteries launched salvos that saturated enemy defenses. His defense lasers created a protective web around the station that nothing could penetrate. The Cravathi focused massive firepower on his position, but Fortress Prime held. The station's shields flared bright blue, absorbing incredible punishment. Shield strength at 40%, his tactical officer reported. We can maintain this for approximately 1 hour before we need to rotate shield faces. Then we'd better make the next hour count, Tyler replied. Target that battleship, the one coordinating their assault. Kill the head and the body dies. Supreme Empress Zarthel watched the battle with growing frustration. Her fleet was losing. Again. How was this possible? She had 8,000 ships. The defenders had only 800. Yet somehow the Alliance was winning. Her ships were dying by the hundreds while the defenders lost only a handful of vessels. All ships concentrate fire on the planetary surface, Zarthel ordered. If we cannot destroy their fleet, we will bombard their world. Glass their cities. Kill their civilians. Make them pay. Hundreds of Cravathi ships shifted their fire toward Earth itself, trying to punch through the defensive shields. Some shots penetrated the outer layers and struck the inner defenses. More got through. A few reached the atmosphere and detonated, creating massive explosions in the upper air. But the planetary shields held. Earth had been through worse. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions. The planet had survived them all. It would survive this too. Then something unexpected happened. Ambassador Vekral, the reformed Cravathi officer, transmitted a broadcast on all Cravathi frequencies. His message went out to every ship in the swarm fleet. Fellow Cravathi, Vekral's voice carried across the void. I was once like you. I believed in the swarm, I believed in conquest and domination. But I have learned there is another way. The Alliance offers mercy. They offer freedom. The Supreme Empress is sending you to die for her pride. She has already lost this war. She is using you as pawns for her revenge. You have a choice. Stop fighting, surrender, join us. Build something better than the swarm ever was. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one by one, Cravathi ships began ceasing fire. Their crews mutinied, refusing to die for a lost cause.